as the institution we are in will find values therein. And they may not be in the constitution, but they guide how we react, how we behave, and what we do. Therefore, we want to say, broadly, values guide the way we conduct ourselves. And we are saying that our values are broad references concerning appropriate course of action or outcomes and reflecting a person's sense of right and wrong. You will be described by the values that you exhibit. It's not surprising that some people are known to be misers. That's the only thing that stands out about you, you enjoy it. While others will be described as the people who are kind, ule karimu, ule anaipenda watu, ule anayejali. You see, values define who we are. Next. And when we were looking at policy yesterday, we said public policy include ideas and actions of government and other players in response to societal problems. When it is public policy, then we are talking about government involvement. Then we are talking about whoever else, but the focus is on the citizenry, on the public, members of the public. The ideas that we want implemented, the concern that we want to be addressed. The policy will then provide rules and regulations. That means, concerning that matter, how should we engage? The policy will concern how rules and regulations will be implemented. That means the roles of various actors and stakeholders. And lastly, the policy will say the impact, the change that we expect by putting in place the measures that we propose. Now, we are looking at mainstreaming values in public policy making process. And when we are mainstreaming values, we are saying, as public officers, as public institutions engage with the public, with the citizens, there are certain expectations that should drive who they are. Because a public policy will be implemented by institutions through individuals. Here we are looking at engineers in the engineering sector. In the medical sector, we are looking at professionals who are working in that side, the policy in that side. Whichever other sector you want to look at. So we want to see what is the place of values in this. Because the absence of it will give us some of the things we see. In Kenya recently, we heard of a story where a patient of a different ailment went to hospital, Kenyatta National Hospital, and the doctor operated on a wrong patient, opened their scar, and discovered later that it was the wrong patient. Can you imagine? You are in hospital, your problem is with the leg, and you are made unconscious, prepared for an operation on your leg, and you end up with a doctor who operates on your head and opens your brain. Then later discovers there's no problem. Says, what's happened? Says, no, it was not this patient, it was the other one. That's not fiction. It happened. We have seen cases of professional negligence. It's not uncommon to see a building that cost billions, millions, hundreds of millions of bill collapsing hardly 5 years into its life, and taking along with it lives and casualties and property of innocent tenants who are living in that house. What is happening? We are talking about values. It's not unusual to see pupils impregnated by their teachers. We talked about the Ministry of Education gave us figures of how many school-going children are now out because of pregnancy. And in some sad cases, the teachers are involved. So we have a litany of cases where we have professionals who turn out differently, totally devoid of values that we want to see. And then we are saying, in terms of embedding values in public policy, so that the work of agencies within the public can promote national values, we begin to examine at the individual level. What kind of persons are we talking about? What are the individual values? And here we are talking about the attributes that individuals exhibit in engaging with others. We will be talking about values like being forgiving, a forgiving person, respectful, honesty, responsibility. If you are responsible in the ordinary day-to-day things, chances are that we can give you a higher responsibility and you will carry along that same value of responsibility. Therefore, it is important what individual values people exhibit. When we are talking about national values, we should begin, we cannot see national values if we have a bunch of individuals who don't have values. So the discussion about values should focus on individuals. Who are we dealing with? Who are the officers? Who are the professionals sitting in those offices to execute the mandate that is restored for those offices? And individuals come from families. So that the initial institution of instilling culture and value is the context of the family. Then we are looking at a family that is stable, endowed with the basic needs. They can find food. So that kind of discussion is all round. But families would teach children in the infancy as they grow up how they should relate to other people. If they will learn to forgive, learn to forbear with others, being patient, learn to be respectful of others. Because if they didn't learn respect at an early age while still at home, then they will turn out to be contrary to what we expect. And families exist in a society. Traditional African societies, like you said earlier, were communal. Everything was community. There was a check, even on individual families, they have to comply with the social code of conduct agreed. And therefore, what is the outlook of that society? We are talking about norms that are embraced by people who share. Society is talking about commonality in language, commonality in place of residence. Some societies could be based on faith. But this will then raise children with an outlook. And therefore, our engagement should be as the society. How are we? What is the outlook towards other societies like ours? Then, the next level would be outside the community. We are talking about religious faith groups, most of which cut across ethnic boundaries. Because certain faiths the message would include or recruit following from diverse backgrounds. To some extent, religion can be a partner, an instrument in the fight against tribalism, ethnic tendencies, because it has membership across. But to what extent have we used this positively? Because as it turns out, it's not unusual in a cosmopolitan place to find certain churches, if the pastor is from community X, majority of the followers are from that community. They could be in a cosmopolitan environment, but they are free to conduct their service in the vernacular, just to perpetuate that outreach and outlook. We are saying then, it's time we realize that turning around religious groups and religious communities to begin to appreciate their place as agencies of building a national outlook among Kenyans will help us quite a lot. Then in the corporate world, we have institutional values. As a university, there is an outlook that Kisii University has. Is an outlook which is different from other universities. How does a Kisii University student behave vis-a-vis a Maseno University student? There are certain trends, they call them trends, that will obtain in certain institutions. And universities should seek to build positive cultural outlooks so that the university is able to be an instrument of socialization. That students who come or graduate from these universities are national, they are patriotic, they transcend the narrow ethnic boundaries that we find ourselves in. It is true that we have many universities now, which is a response to the needs, the growth. Population is increasing. Therefore, there must be more space and opportunities available for young people to access university education. And the distribution is part of growth. But that should not mean you localize the institution to be local in the sense that it builds the us as them mentality instead of building a national frame of mind. So there should be a culture that is positive. Then Kenya is part of the international community, and our laws are clear. Article 2.5, the Constitution provides that the general rules of international law shall form part of the Kenyan law. Once, as the Parliament, they have ratified that protocol. Parliament has discussed and ratified, so it becomes part of the Kenyan law. So we must link up with the international community. And here we are talking about aspects like environmental conservation, because rain, the natural forests will affect the general regional weather patterns. So all countries subscribe to international protocols as concerning climate change, as far as conservation of the environment, regional peace, and integration. So those are some of the aspects of values that are international. Then as a public officer, because that's where you are headed when you graduate, there was a discussion earlier about internship. When you do get into public service, either as an officer or an intern, we have values according to the Constitution, Article 232, which bind all public officers. And these values of the public service include high standards of professional ethics, efficient, effective, and economic use of resources, responsive, prompt, effective, impartial, and equitable provision of services, and the list goes on. The intent of these values is to build a public service that is accountable, not wasteful, not self-seeking. They will go on, next slide, including emphasis on performance through professional efficiency, effectiveness, and economic use of resources. That is key. Then timeliness of service delivery, equity, impartiality, and transparency. Representation at all levels to reflect the face of Kenya. And on that one, in terms of employment, there is a rule that you are not supposed to employ more than 1/3 in a public institution, 1/3 of the workforce to be of one ethnic community. And for county governments, I think there's also a rider, 70%. Then we have the national values that we discussed earlier this morning. What I'm trying to say is that in terms of legal provisions, there is enough framework within which, both as an individual officer, as an agency, when operating to discharge your mandate, you are guided. And therefore, in formulating policy, that should be the context. Let me do the next slide. So that national values being at the center, we have all the attributes around it that will include the cultural expression of the individual and the people, corporate organizations attaining their mandate, individuals in their career progression and growth, because you'll enter the service at the entry level and you'll hope to grow through the ranks. That is the dream of every individual. How you progress through those ranks must be guided by the national values. Then next. So then, when we are formulating public policy, we are looking at what would be the beginning point. And the source of this will be either in the circle of government, the agenda is set by the executive through an address to the National Assembly, or Parliament as such, by the chief executive, who is the president. At the beginning of every house, the president is required by law to address Parliament. And in that address, he outlines what the government intends to do. My government will do this, intends to do this, to address this. So that discussion by the head of state sets the agenda from which the legislators will now begin to extract, whether it is policy, the ministries will begin to develop policies to address what the president has said. If it requires legislation, the legislative assemblies, both Senate and National Assembly, will begin to draft legislation and so forth. So it begins from the agenda set by the head of state. Number two, in the budget speech, because budget is about where we put resources, and resources are assigned to mandates. The process of preparing the budget, I think that's a discussion for another day, would also include what the government agencies are saying. So they are all fed into the budget statement, and that budget statement will give an outlook of what is ahead. So that outlook will provide opportunity for this to be realized, because we are planning to execute, resources have been allocated. It can only work when there is a policy framework to enable it to take place. Public commissions are independent offices have also mandates which also require certain policies to be formulated. And lastly, a stakeholders meeting, which opens it up broadly that even Kenyans at all levels in various formations, here I'm talking about pressure groups, there could be civil society organizations, faith groups, community-based organizations, have an opportunity to contribute towards formulation of policy. I'll give you an example like we are in the process of reforming our education sector to introduce the competence-based education, the CE. This was born out of stakeholder engagement. The policy to shift from 844 to 26333. Now, at various levels, you see stakeholders being called upon to evaluate, to give feedback, to make proposals. So that is in the education sector. It would happen in all other sectors wherever policy is required to be amended. And it will go through a number of stages which were discussed yesterday. I'm bringing this up for us to reflect on this together with the national values that we know, to be able to place then what values do we need when we are at the problem identification stage, which requires us to verify that indeed there is a need, to define that need and provide details about how it manifests. Then setting priority in terms of agenda setting, that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 needs. These 10 needs, what is more urgent than which one? Which one, if we addressed, would alleviate the effects, the impacts of these others, so that we prioritize them in the manner we feel we should address in the context of limited resources. Then policy formulation, decision making, that is evaluating and comparing the alternatives. Then we help to implement, and finally, after we implement, we monitor and evaluate how the progress is going. So evaluation will be a process embedded in all the steps that we develop. I felt like posting here because this is where it all begins and ends. Finding values in the process of making public policy. And I've said, if we do not have the creation of national identity objective in mind, we will lack to be patriotic. We must seek to address national interests. That is what patriotism is all about. That as we propose a shift in policy, what are we seeking to create? So what we seek to create must be in line with our national agenda. When we are differentiating and giving priority between the various options and requirements that we have, what basis do we have? Do we see the aspects of good governance? Are we enhancing good governance? And then it comes to implementing. Which agencies will be responsible for implementing? How are we preparing those agencies appropriately to play their part in causing that policy to be successfully implemented? Let's go. I will leave that discussion for another day, because maybe we will be pressed with time. I would have wanted us to do something on that embedding of values at various levels. But nonetheless, I want to come to this last part because I will need to have time to respond to specific issues that you want to ask. Here we are saying, what would public institutions do to help mainstreaming of values in the public policy making process? And I'm proposing, number one, that it is the responsibility of all agencies of government to implement legal, policy, and administrative actions that promote the realization of national values, which we discussed in the morning. Because, like we said, government must take lead. It must set the enabling environment. And that includes policies that directly have a bearing on how to promote the values envisaged in Article 10. And that is applicable in all sectors. We have no time to look at it, but all government agencies have a contribution to make. It is up to each of them to look inwardly at their mandate and the responsibilities they have to see what is it that they need to contribute. Number two, agencies and officers in public service need to put in place structures, programs, and guidelines for the promotion of national values and principles of governance. We are talking about doing an assessment of where are we getting wrong. Then we have seen this happen in service delivery reviews, finding out from your clientele whether they are satisfied with the services being offered. Then coming back to re-engineer the system and the structures in place to reflect values. We have seen recent developments where government has been adopting a digitization system, like e-procurement, like lodging your tender applications online, government making payments online to limit person-to-person interaction, because that's where corruption is bred. That you can send your application online. This morning we're talking about application for higher education loans. You don't need to go there and appear in person and meet a clerk who is hungry for shortcuts to ask you for 50 bob for lunch before they process your form. That has cut out, again, another before corruption, when they just say, apply online, and they will process online and give you the service without you going in person. That's the kind of innovation we're talking about, the systems that will limit opportunities for Kenyans to be tempted to enter into corrupt practices. So we talk about various innovations and engagements that public institutions can put in place to promote values. 3, making promotion of values an integral part of institutional projects, programs, and activities. That means your mandate may be agricultural. You are a horticultural officer or office for that matter. You should not lose sight of promoting values, because there are values that will be violated or enhanced by what you do. Just where you choose to engage, the farmers, how you sample out your farmers. Do you discriminate or are you inclusive? Do you respect human rights? That farmer who cannot come to you, you should be able to go to them and give them the same service. So once you are mastered the values that you are expected of, then you will make that part of your normal operations. 4, ensuring continuous awareness creation and dissemination of information on the national values. And we cannot overemphasize that intent, because It's not just here. Many times you meet many Kenyans who don't even know national values are in the Constitution. They even don't know which ones they are. And so it is the responsibility of agencies to create that awareness. And this can be done in various ways, including even headers and footers on the emails that you churn out, including, like what Kippra have done, branding of your IEC materials, deliberate actions taken so that people begin to know we have national values and they affect us. Then we're talking about participating in national monitoring of values. That means the responsibilities for all of us to ensure that that is done. So participating may mean giving feedback, making proposals on what needs to be done to make intervention. Number 6, developing systems and programs to hold public officers to account whenever there is a violation of values. That means, just like we say, celebrating the values champions, the contrary, those who violate, as we celebrate the best examples, those who violate must be punished and be held to account for it. Committing to leadership styles, and we talked about that earlier, by putting in place leadership, and those who are in leadership providing the example that we require. And lastly, we have said celebrating. We should have, when we have the prize giving, when we have celebration of the longest serving employee, the best employee of the year, let's also have the best values champion within the institution. And that would be great. Otherwise, national values and principles of governance are the foundation upon which Kenya's Vision 2030 is anchored and provide the minimum. The word is, they are the minimum standard that public officers should observe in their interactions and provision of service to the Kenyan citizen. Thank you.
Very much. Yeah, hiyo makofi ni ile ya Unio. It looks, we agreed that in Kisii, God showers anytime. So, na Mungu akiamua kuoga, saa zingine radio kuja nayo, sindio? Sasa nataka tupatie nyongeza ile makofi ya manyunyu tukipanda mpaka ifike radio. Sawa sawa? Are we ready? 3, 1, 2, manyunyu. Thank you. You guys are wonderful. Now, we will ask us, because remember that we continuously are saying the national values and the principles of governance is a collective yet individual responsibility. So I want to hear 2, 3 quick responses, queries, comments about what we've gone through today from the ground. If you feel one here, 2, and 3, this lady here. Sioni mwenye alikuwa na mic ameenda wapi? Uko naye ama uliwacha? Ukienda kutafuta hiyo mic yako nipatie huyu atumie na uko wapi? Nitakushikia kwa simu yangu. Simama.
Okay. And to reiterate what Prof. Francis has said, I say that is our calling. They are saying that it is our collective responsibility to promote the national values. So imagine all of us that we should not let our leaders to divide on tribal basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What is calling us to do, we are headed, there was a second hand somewhere here. He is saying that, especially now that we are thinking of going towards 2022, let's not allow leaders to divide us on tribal lines. Let us be the agency that tells those leaders, sorry, we are not dancing the music of your divisive politics. Yes.
Okay, my question is on values of public officers. You laid down the values for all public officers,
and they are very clear. But many times you are faced with the challenge whereby there is an embezzlement of funds. And I like to know what might be the cause of this embezzlement of funds, especially in many of our institutions, and how can we combat them to gap the benefits. That's my question.
Thank you. I think you guess about it. There is a lady somewhere here. Yes. I am always happy that ladies are asking questions in conferences. Ladies, away! Oh God, okay.
So my concern is how we national values that are not in line with community values or maybe religious beliefs, such as values like equality, inclusivity, while still observing the human rights. Thank you.
Okay, any other? Because the first one was a comment, I could allow one question. There's one other lady at the back. How do we deal with values that are in conflict? Yes.
Thank you very much. I suggest that we include courses in all professional courses. They are health courses, health courses, HR courses. We have one unit that deals with issues of national values as a mandatory course. Thank you.
Wow, that is a wonderful suggestion. I think we should clap for that. And I wish, because all of you, tomorrow you will be becoming the deans. You are the people who will be developing curricula. Unasikia your suggestion? Okay, so was that a hand for a comment? Or, okay, that's the last one there. There's the last one there before we allow you guys to respond.
Okay.
You're on.
Okay. My question was, how do we measure the impact of say that again, measure? How do we measure the impact of public policy?
Okay, how do we measure the impact of public participation? So let's allow Edward to go through those values. Meanwhile, Agatha Tunui, you should move closer to me here as Nyongesa goes through this. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you for the comments about not being guilty. And I like what you say, not to allow ourselves. I think that's a very valuable decision that young people need to make, because many times politicians are the perpetuators of either ethnic hate or division, and they use young people as agencies. So it's very commendable that young people need to take a stand. The measures through the affirmative action funds and all other programs that have been discussed here before, aiming at empowering young people, is to facilitate taking of that kind of stand, because it's not that you are so desperate that you will go for handout to harm someone else. So it's a good decision. Then the discussion about reasons why people engage in graft. I think we had this discussion earlier in the morning, that reasons people are corrupt range variously from individual philosophies and values up to the system, shortfalls within the system, and even peer pressure. So we are saying, in spite of all this, what will cure all the need to, and the hunger and the thirst to engage in corrupt practices is if we will embrace values and become values people in things and offices we are hired to serve. There was a good question about dealing with values that are in conflict with our cultural attributes. And she gave a very good example about quality. We are looking at our African societies that are matrilineal. The aspect of gender equality does not exist in most African societies. And I want to say this, just like I would say between the Constitution and the law. When you're making a law and it's making provisions that are contrary to the Constitution, you are told that that law is inconsequential to the extent that it contradicts the Constitution. The higher law takes precedence over the law and rule. So the national Constitution of Kenya overrides any other values. I would say for the national values that we have in the Constitution, they were arrived at through a consultative process. Going through all the community, faith-based cultural values, the aggregate was those values in the Constitution. And once they are enshrined in the Constitution, they override any other contrary opinion. So therefore, the values that push down the ladies in our society are out of context. And that's why government has put in place various mechanisms to empower the less empowered gender, the female gender, through the affirmative action projects, through the law that requires that not more than 2/3 of one gender should be in a public office or institution. All these are processes that are now in force. And that's why if there is any violation of any rights according to the Constitution, one has redress. You can go to court, you can address, there are areas you can go to address any violation of any provisions in this Constitution. Then there was a question about, yes, a recommendation, a good one, that universities need to have courses and programs that promote values. And I want to agree and report that, of course, we sit where we see what agencies are putting in place, and quite a number of universities have put such programs in place. I don't know about Kisii University, but not yet. So I think that call is in time, and you've had it. Let the university pick that up, because either we have seen cases where aspects of national values have been embedded in other programs that exist, but in others, more progressive, they have just crafted programs on their own. I must add here that universities are independent. There is no ministry that can prescribe a program of any university. We can only encourage them to craft programs suitable to themselves and their senates for implementation. Lastly, I think there was a question about measuring the impact. Is it the impact of public participation or public policy? Public policy. That is done in surveys. We do periodic surveys to see how is this done. And Kippra, that is part of what mandate they do. They will tell you they have churned out very many reports, and we have seen quite a number of those in terms of policy recommendations. This policy is not working well, and they make recommendations on areas that need to be addressed to make it more effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our speaker, Scout, please nisaidie hii bodi ametoka hapa. That has been a wonderful presentation, a presentation that can never be ended because the issues of values are lifelong. This is about who I am. This is about who I should be. This is not about something I do. It is something about who I am and where I'm going. If I choose to go down south, I can be given structures that tell me to go north. But if I've chosen to go south, I will always go south. So there is about the personal will, the personal choice. And I hope that this has been just a beginning, an introduction for us to begin to dialogue more closely with these issues. How do we make our country to be the country it is supposed to be? Remember, in the words of Barack Obama, our society is not alone, but it's an investment from the future. So what kind of investment are you making by the choices you are making every day? When you interact with people, when you interact with the community, what kind of investment are you making for yourself today, but most sincerely for the ones who will come after, long after you have gone, your great-grandchildren? Are you making this nation better or worse? Among the Scouts, there is a philosophy by their founder which says, leave the world a little better than you found it. Leave the world a little better than you found it. So if you feel that there is a lot of tribalism in this country, are you doing something to destroy that tribalism? If you feel there is too much corruption, are you doing something about your own genes, about your own identity, about your own being that will destroy those seeds of corruption? If you think there's bad governance, are you governing yourself with responsibility? If you think that the rule of law has been ignored, are you respecting the rule of law? Because as the great American say, if you clean your backyard, the entire world will be always clean. Remember that. So if I clean my part, you clean your own. These national values will not be an issue of asking, what is the directorate doing? What is the government doing? This is something we need to begin to ask ourselves going forward. What am I doing to make sure that the national values and principles of governance in this nation are being followed and they're giving us the best? So let us now put our hands together to appreciate Edward Nyongeza, the Deputy Director from the Directorate, for doing this wonderful presentation for us. And we are going to do this in a 3-tier kind of system. Inaenda hapa tatu, hapa kwa mkono tatu, na hapo kwa mguu tatu. Okay? Tuko tayari? Haya, tuanze kwa mkono moja. Tena. Kidole. Kidole. Mguu. 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 Kidole. Kidole. Mkono. Mkono. Thank you very much. Tupigie makofi kwa wanafunzi wema. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to bring one of our own daughters who has written a piece, and the piece she wants to perform to us is Story Zetu. This is an individual composition. She has just composed this, and she wants to tell us, how do we translate Story Zetu into something meaningful for all of us? Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Agatha Tonui.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon once again. My name is Agatha Tonui. I wrote a song on our country that I'm going to perform it. Story zetu, nimekam kwa show, safari yetu. Hatujafikisha level. Oh, take zetu, wenye tuko pale pale. Tushikile wenzetu, wenye wamegoma chini. Tulishapata freedom yetu, biggest achievement kwetu. Our hopes and all our dreams finally came true. Yeah, our heroes, kajitolea daima Kenya. Lakini hatujafika mbali, safari yetu bado. Changamoto hapa nyingi, taturegesha pale pale. Ufisadi, ukabila, utengano, taturegesha pale pale. Tutafika kileleni though, if we mind each other. Hali zetu zitaimarika, tukijiunga sote. Tutokako ni mbali,
jamani, usidhani ni hivi hivi. Tutokako ni mahali, tuendako ni mahali. Maisha jamani, usidhani ni hivi hivi. Get ahead, achieve your dream. Get ahead, Kenya, everything assured. Get ahead, achieve your dreams. Get ahead, everything assured. Tutoka kwenye mahali, tuende kwenye mahali. Maisha jamani, usidhani ni hivi hivi. Tutoka kwenye mahali, tuende kwenye mahali. Maisha jamani, usidhani ni hivi hivi.
Thank you very much, Agatha. That is Agatha. We all have a story, and if you cannot use your story, you could transform this nation. But if you copy stories from others, that will have no impact in who you become and what you do. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to close this part of entertainment by presenting the Kisii University Choir with a Kisii dance, a very short dance. Tafadhali choir, when I'm speaking, ungekuwa umejipanga, because I don't have time to wait for you to jipanga. And this dance is an opportunity for us to reflect. How does culture help us to develop and grow together? Those of us following this conference online, we appreciate you for being patient and working with us and continuously supporting what we
Ladies and gentlemen, it will be like a task people of death of this place without a good word from our mouth. So because of our creativity, we have just managed to arrange something special for us in an hour's time. So I hope you do so.
Oh, we want Baba, Kayane, we want Baba. Oh, we want Baba, Kayane, Mama, together and we're so din. Oh, we want Baba, Kayane, we want Baba. Oh, we want Baba, Kayane, Mama, together and we're so din.
national integration and cohesion is what we've just seen, because for those of you who don't know, in that team there were only 3 pieces. Only 3 pieces, some of them in Masai. When I say imagine in Masai and I'm in Kisii. Can you imagine that? This is really national integration. I think we are doing very well, and we're coming towards the end of this program. Those of you who have been following this program online, we are very grateful that you are being patient. Those who are partnered, those who presented to us, we really believe that this has been a great encounter. But before I go to that direction of saying finally what it is, I want to bring back to us the brains behind this. The lady who has made sure that it happens, I know that the CEO gave